I want to share with you two dreams that the Lord sent to me many years ago and that I think are relevant today. They took me by surprise at the time and even scared me a bit. We didn't have the internet then, though, and even at the time I thought that some of this might be for the future. I think that we're looking at some of that now. It was in the 1980s, and I was in college and living at home with my dad at the time. It was at this point in my life when I had returned to a belief in God. It was shortly after this that I had this dream. For 2 nights in a row, I dreamed I saw a red truck floating in the space above the earth like it was in a low Earth orbit. It was my dad's small red Toyota truck that I saw. After having this dream for 2 nights, on the third night I had the same dream again, but this time it was an old style, about 1960s era sedan with worn paint that was orbiting above the earth. As I watched this car float by me in space and it began to float away, I saw a license plate appear on the back, and on that license plate was someone's name, but I couldn't read what it was. Then several more license plates with names appeared on the back bumper of this car from one side to the other. I really don't know how many, but in my dream it seemed like there were more on one side than the other, so maybe 7. It's been a long time, but I don't think I actually had a number. The license plate stretched across a bumper, so it couldn't have been more, but it wasn't 6 because I think it was an uneven number. This only became important later, so it's a little hard to tell, but that's how it felt. And actually, on this little picture I drew here, that's what these little sort of rectangle things are supposed to be on the back of this car. I didn't detail all the bumper thing, but it's just general kind of car. If you can kind of imagine a bumper going across, and this is kind of what I saw. I saw a license plate start in the middle, and it had a name on it that I couldn't really tell what it was. And then the two on the side appeared, and then they kept appearing until they went all the way across. And you can kind of see from the diagram, just doing it like this, you end up with kind of about 3 on one side and 3 on the other. It's kind of how I remembered it, I think. It looked about right. But at any rate, that was like the license plates on the kind of bumper back of that car right there. Okay. Then 3 bolts of laser type lights came from space and converged on the car, and the car vanished. Then in my dream I heard a voice say, "Call it a coincidence if you want." Then I woke up, looked at the clock, and it was around 1 or 2 in the morning. Then I went back to sleep. The next day I went out to lunch with my dad, as was our habit at the time, and I was driving his red truck. He wanted to stop at the bank on the way to the restaurant, so we stopped and I waited while he went into the bank. While I waited, I turned on the radio to listen to some music. Just then, the radio show was interrupted to announce that on that morning, the Space Shuttle Challenger, which I didn't even know was supposed to launch, had exploded on takeoff. I turned the radio off and sat and stared at it for a moment. What else could I do? I was studying the sciences and just gone through a process of reconciling with my belief in God. So it was a tragedy, certainly, but sitting in that truck that day, I might as well have just landed on Mars. And yet that's it. That was 34 years ago, and I can tell you now that taken by itself, that might not tell us much more than this. It was astonishing to me, but all I can share with you now is the story. I can also say this, though. God wanted me to know He was there, and He proved His point. This is why I pay attention to the dreams, both my own and those of others, that seem to come from the Lord. Since we're hearing a lot of those now, I wanted to share this experience, as well as one other dream that I had later. I started having similar dreams after that, but not of the same magnitude. I would just sometimes have a dream, and then something similar would happen later, and even those eventually faded. There was one, though, that seemed to be for a time in the future, and I think that time is coming to be now, so I want to go over it. First, I should explain some of the symbolism. I was brought up in a Catholic family, but I had some Protestant influence. I also had atheist influences in the university. If it sounds like those ideas don't go well together, it's because they don't, and I eventually had to sort it out for myself. That explains some of the very mixed symbolism of the dream, although I really never lived anywhere where there was a significant Jewish community that I knew of, and that was just part of the dream. I also definitely do not speak Yiddish. So, this dream was somewhat later than the first one, but in the same general time period. In this dream, I was in a Catholic church, and I'm coming up to the altar to take communion. There was a priest going down a row of people and giving communion, but he was not an ordinary-sized person. It was like he was a giant dressed in a priest's robes, and in the dream I understood that he was Jesus. As he got closer to me, the perspective of the dream switched, and I was standing behind and looking at myself, instead of being right in a row of folding chairs being given communion. Instead of being right at the altar, the people were sitting in a row of folding chairs being given communion. I wrote this myself. You'd think I could read it. Sorry about that. I was sitting in a chair on the end, and I felt I was struggling to stay awake with my head bobbing up and down. As the giant priest / Jesus got closer to me, he said, "You are a member of, or one of, the Goyim." And I understood this to not be a good thing. He then made a signal to someone at the side, and I watched myself in the chair while someone came up and dumped a bucket of water on my head. Then he said, "I have a special communion for you." Then the dream ended. Okay, so I've been trying to watch less YouTube, and lately I've been trying to watch the more spiritual channels and stay with the Bible reading. That being said, I do like cute animal videos, and if you've ever seen the I don't have a cat videos, you know what I'm talking about. That was the kind of feeling I had after I woke up from this dream. This was an I don't speak Yiddish dream. It was easy enough to guess what language it might be, but I didn't even know that yet. I had to check. So as it turned out, the library where I had studied every day had just recently placed a podium with a large unabridged dictionary in their lobby, just in time for me to need it. I was going there anyway, and now I officially speak one word of Yiddish. 2 if you count the plural. Goy is a non-Jewish person. Goyim is plural. I had never heard that word before in my life, but now I knew what it was. Now we just need to figure out what Jesus meant by it. Okay, so it's been more than 30 years later now, and things have happened. Now we might be able to sort through it. For one thing, the Jewish reference actually is fairly easy to understand because it is part of Christian theology. Indeed, both Jesus and Paul spoke of this, as when Paul speaks of the grafting of a wild branch onto an olive tree as an example of God grafting Gentiles into his kingdom. This would simply mean, then, that a giant Jesus, dressed as a Catholic priest and using the Protestant symbolism of a church being asleep, and therefore being criticized in derogatory Yiddish, is simply a reference to anyone who is not really a follower of Jesus, regardless of their background. Aside from any personal reference that might have had for myself, it should not be difficult to see this situation played out in our present world. That, therefore, is the direction I'm going to go with this, but that will have to be for another video.